Hello, welcome to another episode of the Data Science Leaders Podcast. I am your host, Dave Cole. Today we have Tim Suhling. Tim, welcome to the Data Science Leaders Podcast.
Thank you very much, Dave. Looking forward to being here.
Great. So Tim is the VP of Global Business Intelligence at Ingram Micro. So business intelligence and data science are not exactly the same thing. And today on the podcast, that is one of the things that we're going to dive into sort of head first, which is trying to understand the sort of symbiotic relationship or the complementary relationship between data science and BI. Love to see how you're doing that at Ingram Micro. The next thing we're going to be talking about is the Customer 360 initiative that you all are embarking on. If I had a penny for every Customer 360 initiative that I saw at companies, I'd be a very wealthy man. But there's a reason for that, right? There's a reason that folks, companies are really trying to understand their customer better. We're going to dive a bit into that. And last but not least, we're going to be talking about measuring data science. On the DSL podcast, we've talked about that a lot, but I think that's really important to get sort of different perspectives on how companies can measure the effectiveness of their data science initiatives. So let's go ahead and just dive right in, Tim. Let's talk a little bit about what you're doing at Ingram Micro. I just want to understand sort of your role and how you see sort of BI helping the data science teams.
Sure. Great segue. Let me start out with a bit of a history lesson on Ingram Micro. First, just for those who are listening in, we are a technology distributor, meaning that we distribute technology to customers who do installations and manage services for end users, which are the customers at the end of the value proposition. Ingram Micro has been in business for over 40 years. Today, we are the world's largest distributor. So we have a significant global footprint, which leads to analytic challenges. So to speak to the question of business intelligence and data science, let's again go back historically and look what we were 4 to 5 years ago. We were a traditional analytic organization, meaning that we had analytic resources solving one-off problems. And that's a good thing, right? The organization would come to us with a varying series of questions. How do we look at customers differently? How do we understand who's going to buy from a propensity perspective? How can we look at what our warehouse optimization could and should be, meaning how many warehouses should we have open in a specific country? And those are good questions, but they were problem statements, right? They weren't products, they were projects. We were taking on project work and we were delivering a set of recommendations back to the business, and we were doing a really good job at that. Solving real world problems and thereby either removing costs or potentially driving additional margin through the business. And we gave ourselves a nice thumbs up and had a good amount of success, and that was a lot of fun. But over time, I think we realized that we needed to become much more rich in our analytic footprint, knowing that there were bigger problems that we wanted to tackle through the use of machine learning, through the use of AI. And so what we did is take a step back and really looked at what we wanted to be when we grew up, for lack of a better term. What did we want to be for Ingram? We looked at and assessed what our key stakeholders wanted of Ingram if our analytic team and if our data science team, if they could have the world. If the world was their oyster, what would you want out of our team? And what we did at that point in time is we restructured. We changed from a team that was Irvine, which is our corporate headquarters based, to and we had a team in Chennai, India, and decided that we were going to take a localized approach and create a data science nerve center.
You're talking about the nerve center, and what do you mean by a nerve center? Because when I think of a nerve center, I think that there's sort of a centralized location, the brain, and then there's the nerves at all the various countries. So where did you decide to decentralize the data science, and then where were the various pockets around the globe? And talk a little bit about why localization. You felt localization was important.
Yeah, that's perfect. So we believe, after looking quite a bit at it, you think of the airplane model, right, with a hub and spoke, Delta in Atlanta, Dallas and Embarking. We decided that we could bring all of our talent together in one centralized location, and after our data science talent, to be specific. And after a bit of survey, after a bit of site visits, we decided that Toronto was really a good location to house our data science team for a variety of reasons. One is you have a concentrated amount of industry. Majority of Canadian businesses run out of Toronto. Additionally, a wealth of great universities to begin recruiting from and bringing folks onto our data science organization. And what that provided us, and you think of Nerve Center, what does that mean? It really means that we had a deep bench of talent who could all collaborate together. And of course, I'm speaking pre-COVID, and I'll get to the COVID way in which we work through that in a moment. But what we were doing is we were putting our team in one centralized location in downtown Toronto, phenomenal office location. And we were able to then whiteboard ideas, work collaboratively, hand off projects, and really looking to hire individuals with very diverse backgrounds. I think most have realized that diversity is king and trumps pretty much everything else in the world that we live in today. And we were hiring folks with 20 years experience, as well as those who are fresh out of school, those who had varying backgrounds, whether it be specifically in operations or whether it be in advanced AI, facial recognition. So we would span the gamut, and ideally having each of our individuals cross-train each other so that we would become a much more robust but also self-serving organization where we had multiple touch points that we could deliver responses to organizational requests. So that became a bit of our nerve center, and it works extraordinarily well. And it created that hub and spoke concept where we created at the same time, and this is part of the organizational design, was teams that would service both the Asia Pacific region and our European business. And why is that important for Ingram? We divide our organization into three regions: North America, well, the Americas, Asia Pacific, which also includes, just to be clear, Australia and New Zealand, and then our EMEA region, which is the Middle East and Europe, but our core functions reside in Western Europe. The idea was that we would put an office in each of those locations, which would be our core analytic team. So when we get back to the idea of business intelligence, there would be analytics supported by deep data science. So in those regional hubs, what our key for Europe is in Barcelona. And then for the Asia Pacific region, we flex between Mumbai and Chennai, so both locations in India. And the idea was that they would be our frontline associates, working very closely with our individual countries, our individual stakeholders, our vendors, which in other terms, manufacturers, such as Lenovo, HPI, HPE, Cisco, etc., in those individual regions to begin taking an analytic approach. And when they got to a problem that needed deep data science, what they'd be doing is they'd be tapping back into our team in Toronto. So it became a very, let's call it a relationship that was a handoff and a collaborative relationship in that, where we knew that we could take certain projects fully to completion in some of our hubs, but also we needed that deeper bench depending on the sophistication of that activity, in which case we could go back to that nerve center in Toronto. It became a model that simply ran on its own and has during the last 2 years of lockdown, but also has become, in my opinion, something that's easily replicatable by other firms, as well as a model which generates synergies because you're able to be closer and intimate with your customers, whoever they may be in your regions, but also be able to tap back into a corporate entity that can support specific questions and problems.
So if I were to summarize, it sounds like the sort of nerve center in Toronto are the ones who are the data scientists who are actually building the models, and then the folks who are in the spoke or out in India and your APAC region and other areas, like they're the ones who are sort of collecting the requirements, also helping to translate some of the models, get them actually closer to to the end user, and so to speak. Is that right? So like, what is interesting to me though is what is the makeup of the people that you hired in these regional offices? Like, were they folks who had some data science acumen? Did they come from sort of a BI background? And then did you train them? Because I would want my eyes and ears, if I'm in Toronto, to be people who really understood data science, right? Not just understanding the local sort of challenges and issues.
Great point, right? The profile of the associates we hired in the regional hubs were individuals with data science or analytic backgrounds, right? They had to have that core fundamental understanding, whether it be through past work experience or whether it be through their educational training. But those individuals, generally speaking, were very curious on the idea of working in conjunction with a sales rep, right? With a BU leader in a specific country. So very much wanted and had that aptitude to dive into the business and really get their hands dirty with an individual country, understand what those root causes were, build out requirements, take the analytics to a certain level before a handoff, of course, but also had that frontline persona, which is something that not everybody really aspires towards, right? But also then had the ability to translate that need back to our hub, our nerve center in Toronto, to drive those long-term or sustainable model builds and then results that are taken from those models and then implemented back in the field. So it becomes, again, like I mentioned, a handoff with frontline associates working very closely with the business and then translating that back to our data science team.
And then the idea that, the data science all being sort of centrally located is you get the benefits of collaboration, like real world in the office, whiteboarding. Hopefully one day we'll go back to the office and like we did a couple of years, like we were obviously pre-COVID. So that makes a lot of sense to me. But I want to dig in a little bit on the localization aspect because I don't know too much about your business, but it seems like if I'm selling technology, if I'm selling laptops to, large corporations and things like that, like it's different from one country to the next, but how different can it be? Like, can you give me some examples of how that sort of localization has really sort of paid off? And because you could just as easily have folks in the United States who are sort of working with these various BUs and these leaders, but you decided not to. So help me understand a little. Maybe
Sure.
you have some stories there.
It's interesting, right? I come from a pre-Ingram. I came from a CPG background, and the way we looked at a product was a product is a product is a product, right? It has certain every product has certain attributes associated with it, and whether you're selling bananas or cereal, ultimately it's the same from an analytic perspective, not obviously from a sales motion perspective, from an analytic perspective, attributes associated with products.
Sure.
The reason for hyperlocalization at Ingram is that we carry a different line card in each country. And that's an important point. And so France is different than Spain is different than Italy. The makeup of our business, our go-to-market strategies, because of the fact that in many cases, the way that Ingram was built was through a series of acquisitions, like most multinationals. And the way that a company that we acquired behaved or acted or their presence with their customers in a particular country was unique to the country next door. We knew that we needed to be specifically localized. If we think of our businesses, specifically too in Europe, with the advent of GDPR, data use and disclosure laws, we needed to ensure that our work was started, completed, and terminated within the EU. So a very critical nature of being localized, but also then being able to deal with both the language intricacies as well as those items I mentioned previously around line card, around path to market, around customer profile. In some countries, Ingram might have an entire retail business where the majority of it sells into traditional retailers, something that we're familiar in the US like a Best Buy. Whereas in other countries, we may sell directly to more customers and be heavier on that side of the equation, and thereby changes the inputs into the models which we're driving, as well as changes the conversations with those local resources. So the idea of localization follows very much with Ingram's strategy around being the best in the market around a specific idea, a specific category, a specific path to market. And our goal as an organization has always really been to be the number one or two player in each country that we're within and really ensure that we're not always a one size fits all, but have the ability to really customize our approach to meet our customers' needs. And therefore, analytics needed to follow that same approach in order to be successful.
Got it. Makes a lot of sense. And speaking, you mentioned customers a few times. I wanted to dive a bit into the customer 360 sort of initiative, and I made a joke at sort of the outset. And I do think it's important. I mean, now I've also heard folks sort of calling it KYC, know your customer. Tell me a little bit. I personally think that not every company does it sort of the right way. I'd love to hear what are some lessons learned that you've had while you've undergone sort of a customer 360 initiative at Ingram.
It's interesting. I remember I've been with Ingram about 4.5 years, and when I started the organization, I sat down with one of our executives in the C-suite, and he made a comment that every one of our customers, this is we're B2B, right, knows their end user perfectly. And his comment was that in one of his first visits out to a customer, he brought along a bit of an understanding of what that customer's total business was. Who else, other customers sold to that end user within our profile, if that makes sense, right? We sell customers sell to end users. And he blew the socks off the individual he was meeting because he realized that customer only sold about 50% to that end user, meaning there was another 50% share that they were completely unaware of. Right. And that really struck a chord with me. We all knew that Ingram may have 25, 50, 75% share of the total addressable market for a customer, but we were always wondering what that other percentage was, right? It's a pie game. You know you have a certain percentage of the pie. We all know that there's leakage. If anybody who thinks that there's not leakage is blind to the reality. So we
and by leakage, I think you mean competitors, right? Like other people were actually, yeah. Okay, good.
Competitors, good call out. So we know that hey, we have great competitors, and the beauty of being in a good competitive environment is it makes us intensely focused on becoming better ourselves. Competition is a beautiful thing, right? When we started to look at and dive deeper into this idea of, well, what are we leaking at certain customers? What is going to other distributors? We found that we could create a series of models in conjunction with a series of third-party data sets that would allow us to understand what our total addressable market is by customer. If we're selling 50%, we have now been able to identify what the additional 50% is from a product standpoint. We can't necessarily identify where it's being purchased, but we know what that product set is. Mm-hmm. And that was done through, again, deep learning algorithms. The ability to really monitor the behavior of a specific customer over a period of time, and then based upon that behavioral profile, put some additional sets of models against it and begin looking at what we believe is being purchased outside of our purview. This is interesting, and I think it's a capability that most organizations can implement with the right amount of time and the right amount of investment to begin understanding what that periphery looks like. What becomes more interesting, though, in my opinion, is how you activate it, right? Every analytical organization on the globe, in my opinion, faces the same challenge. It's activation, whether you're a consultant and you're building models for an individual company, or whether you're in an in-house organization. It's the activation. We all depend at some point in time on an operations associate, a sales associate, whatever it may be, to take those learnings and take those to market and begin changing behavior. Right. Change management is the most difficult part of the Customer 360 initiative. That is the largest fact associated with what we do from a data science perspective. It's change management. It's getting an associate who's been doing a certain set of activities for 15 years successfully and asking them to change their behavior, asking them to look at an opportunity a bit differently. And what we've been able to do is through the support of our executive leadership, through solutions such as Microsoft Dynamics, which is our CRM solution, we've been able now to pump leads directly to our sales teams for each customer around the globe. So if you think about it, today we have a significant number of customers from a B2B standpoint, in the hundreds of thousands, and we are able to today profile all hundreds of thousands of customers and their complete 360-degree view of where our opportunity lies. And what that gives us is a unique competitive advantage, right? It allows us to continue to have differentiated conversations. We're not going to win every deal because we have an understanding that that business is leaking elsewhere. But what we will do is learn more about our customer and how we can better service them in the future. On top of this activity of putting leads into our CRM system, which our sales reps then begin to have conversations with our customers on, we then began text mining and putting AI against the text. And from there, we're starting to pick out key themes, right? Think of your basic word cloud, but it's a little bit more complex than that. Sure. We're able to pick out key themes on why we're not winning that business. So then what you're able to do then is go back and retool your sales strategy, retool our services strategy, think differently about our credit offerings, so that ultimately then the next time we have that conversation with that next customer who may have a similar profile, we can change that conversation to meet the needs because now we know what the market is telling us from a feedback perspective. So what we've done is we've created a closed loop cycle all the way from the analytic impetus of a model showing us what our opportunity is to then taking the learnings back full circle from our customers who we speak to about that particular model and then changing behavior as we move through the cycle around the second time around the circle to really have a more detailed, more proactive discussion with our customers.
Lots of circle and 360 analogies here. Let me dive in, Tim, and try to summarize here. So it sounds like the first step in the customer 360 was better understanding sort of the market share that you have with each of those customers. So if you have a customer who is buying products and services from Ingram, what percentage of the total TAM that you have with that customer is with you, right? Is with Ingram. So say that's 40%. So you it sounds like part of the approach was to look at third-party data, obviously also to look at the behaviors and the interactions that you have with the customer on that 40% side, but using some third-party data to figure out the additional 60%. Like, is it actually 60%? Do you have 40% market share? Do you have 50, et cetera? Is that part of the story to better understand?
Third-party data in conjunction with internal data science activities.
Got it. So once you have that, once you understand sort of your market share, you did mention informing the actual folks who are on the sales side. And sort of better instructing them. Is it something along the lines of like, hey, if we have large opportunities, we have very small market share, well below sort of where we are with most of our customers in that region or in that area, then that's sort of low hanging fruit, and there should be no reason why we can't sort of increase our market share. Is it kind of like that, or is that too simplified?
It's a little bit simplified. What we've tried to do is then put lead scoring in place, right? So we lead scored every customer based upon a vendor that we wanted to actually sell to that particular customer or work with that customer on. So then if you receive a score of 1, 2, 3, and the list goes down, from a 1 being the highest lead to a 10 being the lowest. We spent our time focused on those where there were 1s or 2s. So therefore you could know with confidence that you are having your sales team call out against the biggest opportunities, which therefore yields the biggest benefit. So It wasn't a haphazard approach. It was a very specific and targeted approach based upon analytic profiles of these specific customers. Got
it. And then so the text mining comes in is like, then you have the sales, individual, the account executive, what have you, actually going out and selling. And some of that can be, it's over email, I imagine, but a good portion of it is sort of audio. Did you have any sort of audio to text where you recording the conversations and then using that to mine? Is that also part of it?
Exactly. We at Ingram do have the ability, and we do today record all of our phone calls. So we're able to then take those key learnings, take those key words, phrases, comments, feedback, and then have that create a bit of a word cloud or a bit of an opportunity assessment of what we need to change in either our sales pitch, right? That could just be a sales motion, or within our analytic approach. There's going to be times, and if any data scientist or team tells you that they're 100% accurate 100% of the time, they're not. There's going to be times where we were off the mark. We made a calculation error, right? When you're trying to profile hundreds of thousands of customers across all levels of technology, you're going to have opportunities that are misses. And I think it's really important to say that. I think anybody who says that without a bit of humility that they're dead on is probably drinking their own Kool-Aid. We know that we're not perfect, but what we have given is a directional indicator, which then changes the conversation with our customers. And what you find, most customers, most human beings, they just want to tell their story and they want to talk. Right. And what we've done is we've opened up a new avenue of conversation, which inherently then ties us closer to the customer. Everything is around customer intimacy and customer experience. We've been talking at Ingram about those two topics for the last 2 years and investing significantly in those two areas. Customer experience, customer intimacy. If from an analytic perspective, we can start a new conversation, a new line of communication, we've now increased intimacy and we've increased that experience, which inherently, even that in and of itself, will create a stickiness that is non-transferable to another distributor, because we inherently won at the experience just through those analytic profiles. Even if we weren't able to convert the sale, we still did a good deed for Ingram and were able to advance the business over the long term.
And I imagine just guessing here, Tim, but the part of the change management challenge is you have folks in sales who've been selling a certain way for a long period of time. They then started at Ingram, and suddenly now you have these analytics teams who are saying like, oh, here's the best way to have a conversation, and here are the top leads in your region, and the person might be saying, I know where my top customers are, I know how to sell. Am I right on that? Is that
You
what
know,
part? Yeah.
if you think of the history of Ingram, we're a highly successful organization, right?
Yeah.
We've had not just through COVID, but over my tenure with the organization, we've had record results each year. It's not broke, don't fix it. There's always that mentality. It's going to exist in every business across the globe. What we're trying to do is elevate, and it's that straightforward. So you're right. We have very talented associates across the globe and who do an outstanding job and who drive the business forward on a daily basis. We're simply trying to help them take that extra step, go the extra kilometer, yield that extra benefit back to the entity.
Yeah, I mean, I think the story there is you're sort of augmenting and helping them. You're not telling them, what to do per se. You're trying to just make them better, right? Through the use of data science and analytics. I want to switch gears yet again and dive into our last topic because, everything you described is great, but if you're not measuring it, then you don't know what's working and what's not working, and you also don't know the value that the team is sort of producing. So maybe talk a little bit about how you and your team are helping to measure this process or a number of other process models that might be out in production.
Sure. I think measurement is key to everything we do, right? It's how you justify your budget every year.
Yeah.
It's how you speak to your performance when I go to my manager and speak to the results that we contribute to over the year. The way that our team looks at their levels of success. You may write the world's best algorithm, but if it doesn't have implementation and you're not able to measure the results, then it was all for naught.
Right.
So what we've done is we've put a specific emphasis on the measurement of activities. Now, I'll qualify this in two different buckets. There are those items that we directly impact, and then there are those items which we rely on others to carry, for lack of a better term, the ball over the goal line. Sports metaphors don't always work internationally, but I'm going to roll.
That's an American football analogy, but at any rate, carry on.
So there's really two ways of looking at the return that we're delivering from an investment perspective. There are those items that we directly impact and that we can directly measure, meaning we are making the decisions that are ultimately implemented in an urgent and an intimate manner. And then there are those activities where we're asking a sales team or an operations team to change behaviors and then drive results based upon it. So let me talk about the first one. Those areas that we create solutions which are implemented instantaneously or near real time. Let's think about procurement activities or stocking levels in a warehouse. We at Ingram have warehouses. This isn't it's part of our strategy. In the U.S., we have a multitude of warehouses. We actively play a role in stocking levels and products which should be stocked in warehouses around the globe. We make the recommendations, which are then done in conjunction with our procurement teams, and those are the stocking levels which then are adhered to within a specific location. Or we may say wage rates within certain locations so that we say ultimately this is how much an entry-level employee should make, this is how much a mid-tier should make based upon their job grade, this is how much overtime we should be paying, and then after that you receive diminishing returns. So doing those types of analyses which are implemented in the near term, which have real-time OPEX or CAPEX implementation or implications.
Implications, yeah.
We'll get that right. Implications. Yeah. Which it ultimately has a benefit, and we then measure the benefit that is received based upon that. What we're working on now, which I find really interesting, going back to the direct return and measurement, is around procurement levels. What inventory should we be buying at what quantities around the globe? We have and carry a significant amount of inventory, which thereby ties up working capital and has an impact to your financial statements. In conjunction with our operations team, we are actively working on reducing that working capital footprint, or maybe not reducing in some cases, but then more accurately spending those dollars on the right inventory, which is critically important to have right on-hand inventory in our business, right? It's a lot of last-minute orders and areas that we need to be just in time on. So those activities we then measure and report back to our local country leads. What was the impact of this particular activity around labor, around procurement, around logistics? And those are the one-offs which we're able to then have that direct conversation back with the local country chief financial officer. Then there's the other component, which we talked a bit about around the Customer 360, because it's not just Customer 360 that we're talking to our sales teams about. It's a whole host of initiatives, right? We have vendors that come to us that say we need to help launch a new product, or we need to figure out how to push this subscription model service, which, as we all know, subscriptions are the wave of the future for technology today. So as we migrate from traditional hardware to subscription-based services, we need to understand which customers and which end users have that profile in order to absorb that new consumption model. So we'll go out and we'll profile, and we'll help our resellers pair up with end users that we identify that should be engaged in this particular activity. Now, that's all well and good, and our activities from an analytic perspective are very sound. But then again, you're asking another individual to take the ball or take the activity and run with it. And therefore, the measurement, while not difficult, becomes a little bit diluted. And that goes back to what we discussed in our last conversation, which again, I come back to because I think it is such a critical point. And that's the idea of change management. It's changing an organization's behavior so that you ultimately can derive a specific result. So when we see that the activity wasn't being adhered to in the manner in which we'd hope, right? We then have those conversations with our sales leads, with our executives in those individual countries to say, how can we better collaborate together? And then again, measure the activity. So what we're doing is we're reporting back on a monthly basis, not only those activities that we have direct impact on, but then being able to trace a lead generated by a data science associate all the way to the activation point and the conversation with the customer, and then potentially the sale or the quoting of that particular solution, and then the delivery to the end user. What's important, I didn't speak too much about this earlier, but it's that we do have this end-to-end visibility all the way from the end user, whether it be a hospital, a school, a manufacturing facility, all the way to the vendor. So we have the full spectrum view, which thereby allows us to really see the recommendations that we make come to life, and then we're able to report those back through a series of dashboards or through a series of, in some cases, it's me doing just quick status calls with those local countries, but to ensure that we're activating and generating the responses that we want to see. And if not, taking a moment to course correct and see how we can change, whether it be behavior or whether it change the algorithm potentially to take on a new topic or a new technology or a new opportunity that may fit the local need. We go back to a point that you made earlier around localization, and that really speaks to that point, right? Each country has a different initiative. Each country has a different need. Each country is carrying a different focus. And well, there's obviously some similarities. There are unique one-offs around how their growth plan comes together in a certain fiscal year. And that's why we really want to make sure that we're hyper-localized, delivering those analytic responses to the immediate needs of those specific countries.
So I think, it sounds like there's sort of use cases where data science is directly impacting and directly making decisions. And those are probably the fairly easy ones to measure, right? Where you can say, this is, before data science, the model wasn't actually a part of the decision-making process. Today it is. And you can see that our margins are X% better or what have you. And then there are other cases where, similar to the Customer 360 conversation, where the data science is sort of augmenting and helping existing teams who then go on to make decisions. And then, they may use, the lead and it may be successful. They may not, but that you're measuring that as well. And I imagine at the end of the day, like, especially in the case where you're sort of augmenting what a team is doing, part of that change management solution is to show the results, right? Is to show that, like, hey, now that we rolled out this new, Customer 360 initiative, and your leads are now being scored in a different way. And these are the results that we're seeing. Do you agree? Do you sort of see the same thing? And if they do, if they're saying like, yeah, this is working great, then I imagine that can help win sort of hearts and minds who are out in the field.
Yeah, you really said it well. What we try to do in full transparency on this point, we try to build out our case studies first. And we have this unique ability to work across 20, 30 different countries. But we pick a handful that we really try to test and learn within. Canada being a great example. segments within the U.S. business, where we try certain activities that generate an uptick in sales, and we build out case studies so that therefore when we're going to a new country, and you can take this in a frame, take it out of the country perspective, but looking at a localized business where you're talking about BUs, but testing and learning in a safe, secure environment, and then taking that learning and then blowing it out in a much more broad fashion. And that's one of our routes to market that has been most successful, is by having a detailed response of how a certain activity was created and then implemented in an individual location, and how it has the benefit within a specific country. The other piece that is equally important to the measurement is what we do before any activity is we predict what the results will be. So it's a unique option. Whereas if we're going to try to run an activity in a specific country, what we'll try to do is speak to the benefit that will be received through a basic forecast model that will then allow us to say we'll be able to generate X amount of dollars, euros, pounds, pick your currency, if we were to activate this activity, which thereby then justifies the labor. Labor is always going to be king. You have a finite amount. Our sales rep has a certain amount of hours in a day. How much time do you want them to dedicate to this new project? So once we're able to then quantify what that opportunity size is through a certain set of activities that we want to implement, we now can go back to that sales lead and say, we have this opportunity in front of us. We believe it will generate this amount of incremental dollars. You'll need X amount of sales labor against it. And it becomes a very easy ROI calculation that's based upon the earlier discussion of the case study. So it's one of those things where we're getting much better with change management, but like any organization, it's a bit of trial and error, and the more facts you can present, oddly enough, the better it's received.
Yeah. And I was, as you were telling that story, I was almost thinking to myself that maybe, data science teams need like a small marketing department just to help with those case studies and getting those out and sort of selling the vision and selling the results. Well, this has been fascinating. Tim, I really appreciate you being on the Data Science Leaders podcast. I mean, today we talked a bit about, data science and your team and how you have, the analytic sort of arms in local local markets, helping to deliver the data science that the team in Toronto is helping to build. We talked a bit about your approach to the customer 360, and then finally we talked about measuring all of this great work. And I really enjoyed the conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time. If people want to reach out to you, can they go to your LinkedIn page and connect with you? Is there any other way to get a hold of you?
LinkedIn is best. It's Timothy Suhling, not Tim. On LinkedIn, feel free, reach out, and I will always respond back. I make it a point to be fairly active online.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks, Tim. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks so much, Dave. Really enjoyed it, and appreciate your time as well.